Um, okay, so we are talking to Shawna Kay Rodenberg. Welcome to the show, Shawna.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura.
We're so happy you're here. And I was reading, I'm going to hold it up, your beautiful memoir, Kin. That's Kin, not Ken like the Ken doll. Um, meaning people that are related to you, right?
That's right.
Um, so speaking of that, can you tell me any favorite childhood meal that you had that you now make for your kids or your grandkids?
Mm, yes, there are so many that it's kind of hard to even know where to start. I think food was so important to me growing up. I just
Yes.
made something that I really don't share very often with people because I think it's sort of looked down on, but I make like an orange jello salad that my mom always made for me on my
Mm.
birthday. A lot
Ah,
of the foods that I grew up with are sort of, you know, they're sort of poor foods, I guess, in
yeah,
between
yeah.
paycheck foods. So our special
Mm-hmm.
foods are usually one or two or three ingredients, very simple.
Yes.
But yeah, the orange fluff, I make it when I miss my mom pretty consistently.
What's in that besides orange jello?
It's like cottage cheese and crushed pineapple and Cool Whip and
Yes.
mandarin oranges.
It's
The
exactly what
Uh,
I
fancy.
pictured.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of my childhood.
Yeah, right,
And
hon?
yeah, I
Totally.
didn't I didn't love birthday cake when I was growing up. And so my mom would make me that stuff and I loved it.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you get to pass that along to your kids. That's
Yeah.
just awesome. And your grandkids. Your
Yeah, it's
grandkids are so
surprise.
cute.
Thank you. Thank you. I think so
Yeah.
too, but I'm a little biased, so.
Yeah, no, they're super cute. You made Play-Doh with one of them on Instagram the other day, and I was just like, oh, that is adorable.
Yeah, we just made
Yeah.
a trip yesterday to Amish country. We went down into
Mm,
Kentucky and spent some time down there
nice.
because I find it really therapeutic. It's a little bit like my childhood, just not the scary
Yes,
parts. So it's just all the best parts.
right.
Yeah.
I love, and thank you for that segue. That's really good. But I'm gonna we're gonna get into that.
Yeah.
But first, I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So, like I said, we're talking to Shawna Kay Rodenberg. She was the recipient, I don't know if I told you this, hon, of the Jean Ritchie Fellowship, which is the largest monetary award given to any Appalachian writer.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And so the way I found Shawna, hun, was Christy Tate, who is an
Hmm.
amazing author. She was a past guest. We interviewed her about her book Group. She has a new book called BFF coming out.
Hmm.
I can't
Actually,
wait
as
to
you're
read it.
listening to it, I know. I just got a copy. I'm so excited.
It's going to be a joy.
And right. And she posted about Ken on
Yeah.
Facebook not too long ago. And I was reading the post and I was like, I need to interview this woman,
Oh,
Shawna Kay
wow.
Rodenberg. So Christy was kind enough. Thank you, Christy, to connect the
Hmm.
two of us. And I had tried to order your book on Amazon right when I saw the post and it was sold out. So that really let me know that I was onto something good and I needed to get you on the show.
Well,
Um,
I'm thrilled to be
so
here.
yeah, yeah, and big shout out to Christy too,
Yeah.
for both of
We had the
us. Yeah.
best interaction in Chicago. I loved it. It
Ah,
was a very tiny crowd, but warm and just so welcoming.
wonderful. I
Yeah.
love to hear that. I love this like underground network of writers that we are, that we
Yeah,
connect each other and we find each other and we support each other. It's really beautiful.
it is.
I
It
I've
feels very
never
healthy too. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. There
Yeah.
just aren't that many communities like us because we're all
Mm-mm.
independent,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not, these big companies. So anyway, it's just really cool.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I'm going to get into your story.
Okay.
You wrote an article that caught the attention of a CBS News producer, and you open your book by dropping us into the moment that you're trying to sneak 2 ounces of, I think the quote is premo weed into your father in his trailer. So can you tell us that story, the story of that day?
Yeah. So I was actually teaching in Eastern Kentucky at the time, sort of managing a life both in Indiana and in Kentucky, kind of moving back and forth between those two spaces. And also sort of simultaneously existing in 2 different lives, because I was working both as a writer and also still very connected with my family in the mountains. And so I sort of had one foot kind of halfway in the publishing world of New York, and then the other foot sort of in Eastern Kentucky in Letcher County, where I'm from. And so often I was asked by people, I did a sort of similar piece with NPR. I did another one with an independent filmmaker. But when people go to the mountains, they often feel like they need a guide, because it's a very insular community, and you can feel that kind of coming in, you know. So anyway, the CBS producer contacted me because she'd read this article, and she said, you know, can we come? Will you help us write this piece about education in the mountains and school choice? And I told her that I would, and I was happy to do it. But I got up really early and I drove all the way to the mountains, and she was already kind of flustered because she'd already encountered a person from the area who had brandished a gun and made her nervous. And the people that we were supposed to be using their place for the interview, they had decided not to do it. It was just roadblock after roadblock. And the sort of underlying theme through the whole experience was that she had given me a list of the things that she wanted to show the world about the place that I come from. And the list was, you know, full, whether I don't think she meant any harm by it, but it was full of stereotypes and sort of assumptions about the region and about me. And so,
Can I just read a couple of items from that list?
Yeah.
Okay. Interview with you, somewhere related to your childhood. She thinks maybe a diner. B-roll of you walking on a back road. An interview with a passionate teacher who is against school choice, but who voted for Trump.
Very specific.
Very specific. B-roll, you know, the beauty shots, the winding hills and streams, and so then there's photos of your parents or grandparents in a one-room schoolhouse. There's more, but those are just a few of them.
Yeah, I think the one that is in the very last line, the one that bothered me, or I should say hurt me the most. And it said something about signs of blight. And I thought, oh, that one cut, you know, that one cut all the way to the bone. Signs of blight, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you grow up in that area and you live in that area, it seems, I guess, almost voyeuristic a little bit.
Sure.
Signs of blight, you know? Yeah. So she had given me this list, and sort of the entire, I guess, subtext of the day was that we were looking for Trump supporters. We were looking for people who, you know, we were in Trump country. We were looking for the elusive Trump supporter that exists really, I think, in people's imaginations, only in rural areas, right? And we couldn't find them. We couldn't find the signs that she wanted. We couldn't find this thing that she was looking for. And then toward the end of the interview, I had an interaction with the cameraman of their crew. And he confessed to me, kind of, I think because he thought I was secretly a Trump supporter. He confessed to me that he was a Trump supporter. Right. And told me not to tell the crew that he was with. And I just wanted to scream it from the mountaintops, you know, here he is. Here's the person you've been looking for, of course. And so what I did was I wrote it instead. you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I love that. And you said that you had conveyed to her that your dislike of the Mountain Dew mouth and dirt floor stereotypes. Tell me what that means. I've never heard Mountain Dew mouth. I don't know what that means, but tell me, not literally, tell me literally what it means, but also what it means to you.
Yeah, I think I actually have taught some Appalachian studies courses, and I think that that term originally came from an interview with, I think it was Barbara Walters, um, some sort of special that was done with her that talked specifically about how people in the mountains don't have teeth because they drink Mountain Dew, and the
Oh, I
sugar
see.
content is really high. And
Yeah.
so it's an easy way of blaming people with no dental care for,
Mm-hmm.
their own health problems. I mean, that's
Right.
right.
Yeah. And so these are the images that we see portrayed in the media when we are shown the Appalachian way of life. We're
Right.
shown um, methamphetamine users. We're shown people with no teeth. We're shown gun brandishing folks.
Right.
We're shown so
Right.
and what in your experience in your beautiful book is so much different, so much more full than just that. And yeah,
Yeah, I think,
it's
I was deeply affected by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and her writing about what she called the single story. I used
yes,
that idea in developing my own because she was the first person I ever heard say that the problem with stereotypes is not that they're false, but that they're incomplete. And to
yes,
talk about the sort
yes.
of danger of telling the story of a people, especially a
Mm-hmm.
marginalized people, sort of starting in the middle, so that you're dealing like immediately with their sort of reactions to the way they've been treated instead of
Mm-hmm.
beginning with the way that they are being treated, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I just loved that idea and sort of ran with it.
I think you do it really well in the book. It's a
Thank
really
you.
fascinating look at your life, and then the lives of the people around you through your eyes. At the end of the prologue, you say that your father's picking a fight with you, which you predicted would happen. And he says, "Don't you wish you could leave all this behind and go back to the body?" So when you were 4, I think it's when you're 4, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, your father
Mm-hmm.
came back. He had come back from Vietnam, and he moved you and your mom and your little sister Misty to Kentucky from to the from Kentucky to the body in Minnesota. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Well, it was actually from Kentucky to Ohio because he got a job in
Right.
Ohio.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then in
yeah.
Ohio was where he was working at a brake factory, testing asbestos brakes. So he basically went from he was trying to stay away from the danger of the coal mines, and he ended up in another factory that was equally
Mm.
dangerous.
Yeah.
And he was
Yeah,
stuck
that's
and found the information about the body and decided that it was the answer for us. Yeah.
so can you explain what the body is and what you remember about that move
Yeah,
to
I
there?
can. Well, the body, it still exists. It's just
Mm.
rebranded many times. Right now, I think it's called the IMA, the International Ministry Association, I think. Um, when I was a little girl, it was the body. And when I was a teenager, it was the move. Um, I knew it under 2 different names. And the general idea was that, Christ is the head and the church is the body of the bride, you know. And we lived in the wilderness. We were mostly off grid. There was one building that had electricity and water, actually 2, because the tabernacle did as well. And we went to church in various forms throughout the day, sometimes in the evening. We didn't wear pants. Women didn't wear pants at all, or makeup. We were on a strict bath schedule. We bathed. We had our weekly bath spot. We lived in a cabin called the bunkhouse on the farm for a while. And then for a period of time, we lived in the basement of the main house because they would sort of move you around wherever they needed you to be.
Right.
And while I was there, I began school. So I started kindergarten while I was at the first farm in Grand Marais, Minnesota. And I was also...
How many people were there?
Let's see. It would have been, I think, between 25 and 30 at any given time. But there were little...
In the commune?
In that specific commune in Grand Marais. There were thousands, tens of thousands, actually, at one point worldwide.
Wow.
But in the little wilderness, they were all, for the most part, there were some places in Detroit and some other bigger cities. And there were also communities in other countries. So the founder of the church, Sam Fife, and his partner, Buddy Cobb, they flew all over the place and visited these different communities. They were sort of like the celebrities of our church.
Right.
And we lived very strictly, no TV, no connection with the outside world, because we were supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And then Sam Fife was killed in a plane crash. Yeah. And it sort of upset the balance of the whole power dynamic. And then his partner took over for a period of time. And then there was sort of a dying down again of interest. And then another woman picked up the mantle in the 90s, and she was very focused on demon possession and exorcisms. Her name was Jane Miller. And
I want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pause for a second where we are, because there's a point in your book, and it's actually not, I don't think it's when you're there at the body. I think you're back in Kentucky, but you write that you felt like you were writing, like you felt like you had an engine running in your body behind your private parts, and it didn't have an off switch. And you were trying to explain to your mother what was going on with you, knowing that your mom, in your mind, didn't have an on switch, so that she wouldn't be able to really understand what that felt like. And it's a little vague. And I know this was intentional now because you and I had a conversation, but there's an adult at the body who sexually abused you. So when I read that passage about not having an off switch, where it seemed to me that at the time when you're writing that, you were saying like, oh, well, that's just how I am. But it really seemed to me that was the result of having been sexualized at such a young age. Is that what do you think I'm right about that? Or is that?
Oh, definitely. That was my intention, was to sort of point in the direction of that. It's sort of like, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It felt like for me a little bit, because I was so afraid of being bad, of being naughty. I kind of lived under the fear of that all the time, especially in the environment that I was in. I mean, I think I would have been a nervous child anyway, but in that environment, I was even more so. And, after that experience, which happened multiple times, it was like the veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I hadn't lifted it myself, but I sort of, had experienced these certain feelings in my body and had felt some kind of emotional response to being shown attention. I think it's complicated talking about what that feels like. But as a little girl who was scared, I was definitely vulnerable to being shown attention, being told I was special, that I was smart. that had a huge impact on me. And so I felt connected. I thought I was in a relationship with this person. I was also sort of always older than my age. And so I felt like I was like a woman trapped in a little girl's body. Like I had been turned into a woman, but I was sort of stuck in this, form that didn't make sense to my mind or to the things I was feeling.
I mean, and that comes across so well. It's so clearly, rather, in the book.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking time out to talk about that. I thought it's a really important part of the book, how you are staying true as a writer to your memory of that time, and you're not embellishing or adding in things that you know now. But you were writing from the place that you were right then, and what you knew then, and how you felt then. And it really makes you a reliable narrator. Like not only did I understand and connect, but I believed everything you said,
Yeah.
because of that. I think it's really beautiful writing.
Thank you. It was really important to me that, that it was unassailable, when I was writing about that part of my story, because I knew, when you write a memoir, you sort of expect a certain amount of people dismantling, rewriting, correcting, taking issue. There are just multiple responses that people have. And especially when it came to that experience, I felt the importance of truly only saying what I absolutely knew to be true. Because I knew it would be under a magnifying glass.
Of course. Well, and like you said, it's you write it, and then there are these strangers' eyes on your work, and they have questions, and they want, like, give us more here, or give us less here, and you have a choice at that point.
There were multiple conversations that I had with both my editor and my agent, who was also very much an editor for the book, about what I was comfortable inferring, and how far I was willing to take the images that I gave the reader. But I was pretty stalwart, I think, in my commitment to sticking to exactly what I remembered.
Yes. You write extensively about the discipline your father administered to you. I actually winced while reading some of those passages. Looking back, would you classify it as abuse?
Oh, that's such a hard question. It's the same kind of question, I think, as, which I get asked often of, is the body a cult? I think, yes, I would. But I also understand that in my father's childhood and culture that he grew up in, it wasn't. And so there's a complication there.
Yes.
He did not do what he did thinking that he was abusing me. And I think that is an important distinction. Though I also think to some degree that people who abuse never think that they're abusing, because they feel, I think abusers feel victimized, and that's why they abuse often. So it's a cycle, of course. But, would I ever interact with my own kids that way? No. I think my dad wouldn't now either. But again, we lived, not only did we have the sort of spare the rod, spoil the child of the body, but we also were living, and, multiple generations of my family had lived in the same area for hundreds of years. And, my grandma used to, I put it in the book, she used to sing a song to me that she thought was funny about slap her down again, Pa, make her tell us all, Pa, tell us where she's been. There was this sort of acceptance of the slapping of women, the
Yeah.
making them
Yeah.
behave and making sure they make the family look good. And, I often did not, I think, make my family look good in that way that they wanted me to. I still am not really. And so in
Yeah.
that, because of that, I sort of stayed in trouble, but,
Sure.
um,
Yes,
but
you did. You definitely did.
yeah, I did.
Hey,
I still kind of do.
you said
So,
that
yeah.
you said that Sister Catherine saved your life.
Yeah,
Is
she
that right?
did.
Do I have that right?
Yeah, she was.
Was it she who called attention to what was going on back in Kentucky with that adult? Was it her?
Yeah, it was really only, it wasn't in Kentucky, it was in Minnesota that happened.
I'm sorry. I
That's
meant in
okay. That's
Minnesota.
okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. But yeah, we were in Grand Marais. I think my mom and my dad were very young and they were caught up in their own struggle, and they thought we were in a safe place and they just weren't thinking about it because we were at church and what bad thing could ever happen at church. And my mom,
Mm-hmm.
all of I think the abuse that she had experienced as a child, in her mind, happened because there was a lack of church. Her family had sort of disintegrated after her dad died, and they had been relatively unchurched. And she thought that was part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So she thought, since we were living at a church, basically, that I think I would be safe. And, in reality, it was a very dangerous place. And I think that Sister Catherine probably knew some backstory on the person that was in question because she was the blood sister of Sam Fife, the leader of the
Right.
church.
Yeah.
So I think she had an inside scoop, and she saw us across the field. My mom told me this later when I was a teenager, and she saw me walking with this man, and said to my mom, what is going on here? And my mom said, well, he's teaching Shawna. He's tutoring her. And Sister Catherine said, no, that's not going to happen. And then I guess he was just
Mm-hmm.
gone. She sent him
Wow.
somewhere. But my mom was always
She
grateful
knew.
to her for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, your mom was dealing with a lot too
Yeah,
at
she
that time.
was. She
She
was.
she had your father to deal with. She had you kids. She had her role as a wife and a mom there at the body.
And someone who was not
So
comfortable anywhere outside of the mountains,
right. That was the other thing, is that she had
Mm,
been moved there. It
yeah,
was not her choice.
yeah.
It seems like you were like an ADHD kid to me. And I'm not saying that lightly. Both of my children have ADHD, but you write a lot about not being able to sit still and fidgety and kind of going from one thing to the next. And it seems like your parents didn't know what to make of you or do with you. At some point, they take you to receive an exorcism. Can you tell me about that?
That was a little later when I was a teenager. I think I was about
Yeah.
16 when it happened. It was in the
Yes.
summer one year. And Sister Jane, who was sort of, like I said, she was sort of reviving interest in the body, which was now called the Move. And so she was traveling around and doing exorcisms. She had been exorcised herself by Sam Fife. And so it was sort of, I guess the idea was that he was still sort of present when she was present doing this work. It was sort of his legacy. And it wasn't just me, I don't think, who was exercised when we went there. I think that
Right.
my family was also, but I didn't ask them about that. And I didn't really remember that part because, I was very focused on my own experience, I think. But we went to Chicago, and it was a small parish church, I guess. It was a concrete block building. We stayed with a family, a very fearful family. and got up the next day, and Sister Jane cast my demons out, or tried to. And my mom would joke later with me that it never took, the exorcism had never really worked.
Yeah.
But it was essentially very much like a laying on of hands. And I felt, I think the hardest thing about it was that I felt like I had to perform in order for it to end. That I had to put on a little bit of a show to get out of the chair. And that part I didn't like and was hard
Right.
for me.
You spoke to her in a very low tone, you said, during that. Do you remember what you said?
I said many things. I don't remember what I said the names of the demons were, but I remember that I gave her names of demons because I understood that was expected. I sort of pretended that the demons in me were fighting back and saying no, because I also understood that was expected. So, I think the irony is that ultimately I was trying to imitate the voice of a demon,
Right.
in order to be holy,
Yes.
or godly. So a little bit of a paradox happening there.
Sure. And then, it's almost a funny scene, because I don't know if you intended for it to be funny.
A little bit,
But
yeah. We
a
laughed.
little bit, like, cause
Yeah.
yeah. And then your whole family's like exhausted afterwards.
It was tiring.
Everyone is exhausted, and no one's sure that it worked, right?
Right.
But,
exactly.
And it was something that you did instead of what you normally did every year, which was go to a convention that was associated with the body. Is that right?
Well, it was the same thing. It was kind of the same thing.
Oh, it was the same thing.
Yeah. They would have.
It just wasn't the same place.
Exactly. Because they had, we attended conventions regularly in Bowens Mill, Georgia. But then we also went to Uppsala in Ontario, Canada, and we went to a couple in Detroit. There were a couple in Canton, Ohio that we went to, but they were sort of just these mass gatherings, very much like the old-fashioned Old Mountain Pentecostal revivals, There was a large tent or a huge building called the Tabernacle. It was dancing and singing for days, late into the night. Brother Sam had been a preacher. He was a con man and a country musician, and then a preacher. So he came out of that from Florida. So he kind of came out of that Southern Anabaptist tradition, of revival and speaking in tongues and all that.
So, you said that the misrepresentation, we talked about the misrepresentation of the people, the Appalachian people, or the people of Kentucky. How would you describe the people in the community where you called home all those years?
Well, I think in many ways they exhibit a lot of the same sort of signs of any marginalized culture. They can be a little mistrusting. Of course, these are generalizations, and of course not the full picture of the people, but as a whole, I think maybe a little mistrusting, for good reason, of people who come in from the outside to tell their story, which I illustrated, at the CBS interview story. But they're very private. I grew up with very private people. Not a lot of drop-ins. I live in the Midwest now, and sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable with how frequently people just show up. You know, I've been here for a while. I should be used to it.
By the way.
It's like,
Yeah.
I need to know.
No.
You know?
Call me first.
That's
before
right.
No pop-ins. Yes.
That's right. So, there's a privacy, I think, a sort of a desire for privacy, a desire for quiet and solitude, a sense of community, but on an incredibly small and personal scale. And often that community doesn't extend far past the individual family. Like each family is sort of its own thing. So, it's a unique place. It's a place where there's no performance, there's no show, there's no artifice. And that part of it is so refreshing and good and therapeutic for me that I crave it sometimes. Being in a space where you can be in the grocery store and the woman behind the counter will just start talking about what's going on with her and ask you what's going on with you. And it can be a very profound exchange. My kids notice it a lot, a sort of acknowledgement of, I see you there,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I know that your mom died. I see you. I'm sorry, So there's a real sense of love and of being seen for who you are and not how you perform. And I love that the most about it.
Thank you for that. That is a fuller picture, like I said, of the people that you're writing about in your book. And I wanted to talk about your dad. First of all, why were you bringing your dad weed in the opening? Did he just like weed? Was he using it for medicinal purposes?
I think he was using it medicinally. I think that his anxiety was sort of off the charts at the time. And he was using it to calm himself down, which I understand. And I think really the only thing about that arrangement that made it difficult was our history, because he had been a father when I was little who was not comfortable with, he was very conservative and not comfortable with those sorts of things. And so he had brought me up under a certain set of rules. And then as he got older, those rules changed. And it was hard for me to sort of come to terms with this different set of rules,
Right. My dad smoking weed kind of rules.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, okay, so this is okay now. But I got in, I wrote in the book, I got in pretty big trouble at one point because he thought I wasn't.
Yes.
At that time. And so it was, it hurt a little bit. It was like, it always does. There's an episode of a show that I love. I can't think of what it is right now, but there's a scene where a woman is encountering her mother. I think it might be The Good Place. I love that show. And, she encounters her mother, and her mother is like become a really great mother. She's sort of going back to help her, but she finds out that her mother doesn't need help because she's moved on and she's become a great mother. And she sort of has to come to terms with the fact that her mother had the potential for that all along, to be the kind of mother that she needed, but just wasn't capable of doing it for her. And the sort of pain of that, And I think that struck a chord with me because I sensed the truth in that, the parent that I got in my father, the mother that I got, and I think this is true of myself and my own children. My first child got a different parent than my last child did, because we learn and we grow, we change, we figure out how we're messing up and hopefully stop. I was a spanker with my first kids, not often because I just wasn't terribly angry, but I remember sort of coming to the conclusion, like thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't like the way this feels. this doesn't
It
feel
wasn't right for you.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean that I think
Well,
that's
and
true for anybody else. I'm not
right.
trying to say, but for
No, you're
me,
saying it for you.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that astounded me when I became a mom was how many different ways there were to parent,
Yeah.
and that there wasn't a right or wrong, even though I thought for sure there was a right
Yeah.
and a wrong.
Yeah. Me
And then when I
too. Me
became a
too.
parent, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, there isn't a right and wrong. There is the way that I do it, and there's the way that they do it. And sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're not. And
Well,
it's not for me to say.
and also, I think even, there's also the fact that when you are mothering a child, you're not like the moment your child is born immediately transformed into a different whole person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're still the person you were the day before they were born. And,
Mm-hmm.
You have all your hang-ups and you have your sort of pendulum swing reactive parenting that you can't help doing. My parents did it this way, so I'm going to correct and I'm going to do it this opposite
Yeah.
way.
Right.
So there's
Yeah.
these extremes, that at least I found myself sort of struggling with being
No,
permissive
absolutely.
and being maybe a little too
Yes.
lenient as a mother,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I want to just talk about a little bit of your journey to become a writer. You grew up and became a nurse. I don't know if that was the direct path, but eventually you were a nurse. And then you told me you had a midlife crisis and went back to school for poetry. What was
yeah.
going on in your life then?
Well, I was working all the time, and the whole time I was in nursing school, I was actually studying to be a midwife. I wanted to do a master's in nursing and become a certified nurse midwife. And every chance I got would take a creative writing class and a poetry class, a literature class. Every elective that I was supposed to take, I chose those. And I had a wonderful advisor when I was doing my undergrad who sort of got me on accident. He was an English advisor. He was mad that he got me and was assigned me this nurse, and he looked at my transcripts and said, "You're very close to an English degree. Is there something you want to confess? Like, do you have a secret you want to tell me?" And I was like, "Well, I love to write, but I mean, I that's not something that you can do for a living, because I didn't grow up in an area where I thought that was like a feasible profession, a workable profession." And so he said, "Well, you have one more semester and you would have a degree." And so he kind of pushed me to do that. "Why don't you just go ahead and get an English degree while you're here?"
Wow.
I said, "Okay," because I had 5 children and I was trying to go to school and, working at the same time, and just sort of, I felt being kind of led around by my life, from place to place without really knowing what I was doing with myself. And then once I started writing seriously, I think it was getting the degree made me take myself more seriously. And and then I got into Bennington, I thought, on a fluke. I was shocked when I found out that I had been accepted there. And, after that point, I was hooked. That was it.
Yeah.
And I still work as a nurse.
Yeah. Right. Tell us who you take care of.
I take care of retired Daughters of Charity. I work at a convent and take care of retired nuns. Yeah. 65 sisters under the same roof. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which is really fitting because Sister Catherine saved your life for you to now be working to take care of retired nuns.
Yeah.
You tell me that your dad finally gave you permission to write this book because you and I were talking about the personal cost of writing a memoir, not the money cost, the toll that it takes on you. Tell me how that happened, how your dad gave you permission.
Well, my mom was sick. She passed while I was writing the book. And she had been sick for a long time. She had cardiac and lung problems, chronic debilitating problems. And she was 2 weeks before she passed. She called my dad into her room and he came out, and we'd had some conflicts about the book already. He knew it was coming because I'd won an award and there had been an announcement. And so it was getting,
The Rona Jaffe Award.
Yeah. And so the emotions were getting, were running hot and high. And she called him into her room, and then he came out and said, that you can tell, I give you permission and you can tell your story. Of course, that's your right to tell your story. And I knew that it had been because she had said, because I had told her, I was like, Mom, he is not going to like this book that I'm writing, and she told me she wanted me to write it. She knew what I was doing and she wanted me to write it. And then she asked him to tell me as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must
she
have
was
been
an
emotional
extraordinary
for you.
woman.
Yeah. I mean, to get the permission is one thing from your dad, which is a huge thing, but to know that it was basically your mother's dying wish, right?
That's what it felt like. I mean,
Yeah, that he let you do this thing.
It seemed incredible to me that it mattered to her at all at the end of her life,
Yeah. But it did.
It did. Yeah.
It did.
And she was so
and
proud of me for writing.
Yeah.
And she, I was published in Elle. She got to see that. She loved a fashion magazine. So she was so proud of me for that. I think more proud of me for that than the book itself, for being published in a fashion magazine,
Well, that's huge.
It was huge for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I didn't talk a lot about this, but your relationship with your mother is really one of the lights of this book, this bright spot. She calls you Sissy.
Yeah.
Or sis, right?
Yeah.
Because that's that term of affection for you. And she really looked out for you. When we talked, in our pre-interview, I was telling you I was really struck by the scene where you were still at the body, where you were in trouble yet again, for something, and your dad had not yet arrived back. And so she took you to some enclosed area and you guys made sounds like you were getting a whipping.
She did that a lot.
But you were not. Yeah.
There was
so
a
that you
sister
could be
there.
spared.
Yeah, there were actually two sisters there. Sister Beverly and Sister Josephine. And they did not like me. I did not behave, and I was a little sass mouth, and so she would, take me, she'd say, come on. And she'd act like she was exasperated, and then she'd take me into the outhouse and she'd smack her leg and I'd go, ow!
Yeah.
Scream in pain.
Faked it. That's great.
Yeah, and we'd giggle. We'd try not to get caught.
And then you ended up saving her. We don't have time for this story, but there was an incident between her and your dad, and you stood up to him, and he was choking her. Is that right? Yeah. And you came and you got something aerosol, right?
It was Aquanet hairspray. Do you remember Aquanet?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The propeller. It was like,
yes. I mean, they still use it in pageants.
Yeah.
Right. Aquanet
That's right.
is the only thing that holds hair like that.
That's right.
And you threatened him with it.
I did.
Yeah. I didn't get the impression that he was as scared of the spray as he was startled by the fact that his daughter was standing up.
I think that was it. Yeah. I think that was it. And that it's kind of a pretty good image of our relationship. Yeah. I felt in that moment, I think it's important to say too, that I felt concern for him too. I didn't understand.
You did. Yeah. You write about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very compassionate book. There are all these things that kind of happen around you. I might think they happen to you, but you seem to have a lot of compassion for everybody. you seem to tell a very well fleshed out story
Thank you.
for each person, so that there's just not a villain in this story. Nobody
Yeah.
is the villain in your
I
story.
don't really believe in villains, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's
Oh,
something.
yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, I think that's like the old. That's maybe some of the religious trash or residue that I had to shake off. The idea of a villain,
Sure.
or of badness.
Tell me, where can people find you now?
Well,
They want to follow your work, or
I have an website, ShawnaKayRodenberg.com.
Great.
And it has all of, my events. My daughters are my people. They're my team.
Yes.
So my daughter Maddie does this part. My daughter Clara runs my website. They all help me.
How old are your kids?
They're in their 20s. They're all grown now. Yeah.
Wonderful.
My baby just turned 21 or 20. Sorry.
Oh, that's right. I saw that on your Instagram. Yeah.
That's right.
Is that Gus?
It's Gus. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's about 6 foot. I don't even know what now. He's at least a foot taller than his mom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very, yeah.
So they kind of help me with all that, and all of my information really is on the website. I have a TikTok that I don't know how to use really. I have Instagram. That's probably my favorite. That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's where I follow you, is Instagram. But
I don't know why it's so much easier for me, but I like it better.
I think it's just like another thing to do, right? Is like, it's hard enough to post on Instagram, and then to think about posting on TikTok as well. And
I know.
I don't know. I think it's hard too. I don't pay any attention to it. Scotty watches. He scrolls TikTok.
I'm a scroller, but I'm not a poster.
No, you don't post, but you.
It is so addictive. Oh, I can be on there forever. I could be on there forever. I have to be like Shawna.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Focus.
Get to shake yourself. It's good for, the busy mind.
Yeah.
You get like sound bites, right?
Right.
But it's kind of like eating really crappy food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
There's no real return for it, right?
Yeah, because it's not really, they try to act like it's curated, but it's really not. It's just a hodgepodge of chaos. And I'm just sort of, agog for the whole thing. Just sort of watch every morning with my mouth open. So.
Well, Shawna, do you like Shawna Kay or Shawna?
I like both. Okay.
Well, Shawna Kay, it was lovely to have you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, getting me the book so that I could read it ahead of time. And I look forward to hearing your interview with Scott tomorrow. But for today, I just want to thank you for this part, and just say that I appreciate you. So thank you for coming on.
It's been wonderful. You've been wonderful. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shawna.
Hi, my name is Shawna Kay Rodenberg, and I am the only writer in the room speaking up for the misrepresented people of Kentucky.